In the late autumn of 1864, when the smoke of the Civil War still clung to the American horizon like a stubborn fog, a child was born into a house of polished walnut, firm expectation, and perfectly balanced ledgers. His name was Theodore Langston, the only son of Horace Langston, president of the Langston State Bank, one of the oldest financial institutions in Ohio. It was said that Horace never allowed a single account to slip out of order, never tolerated a cent unaccounted for, and never imagined that his son would choose anything less than the weight of the family legacy. But destiny rarely consults fathers. From the moment Theodore could hold a quill, he found numbers dull, yet words shone with an inner flame. While other children traced letters with clumsy hands, Theodore memorized entire verses from Longfellow, whispered beneath blankets by candle glow. While his father taught him exchange rates and the principles of interest, the boy's mind drifted toward metaphors, meter, and the quiet ache of human longing. The bank's heavy mahogany counters were supposed to be his future. Instead, he saw them as monuments to a life he feared would suffocate him. By adolescence, Theodore had developed a habit of disappearing into the wooded hills behind the Langston family estate. He carried notebooks, scraps of paper, even margins of old newspaper just to capture whatever lines his imagination demanded. He wrote about creeks that laughed, the way winter light thinned across empty fields, the dreams of birds wheeling over barn roofs. He wrote about everything except banking. His mother, Margaret, gentle and understanding, tucked his poems into her apron pockets, secretly saving them while urging him to be careful. Your father expects much. But expectation is rarely enough to change a poet's pulse. In 1886, when Theodore was 22, the family arranged for a portrait. It was to hang in the bank beside generations of stern Langston men. Theodore stood stiffly before the canvas backdrop, wearing a suit that didn't feel like his own skin, his dark hair neatly parted as the photographer fiddled with his cumbersome camera. What the photograph did not reveal was the argument that awaited him at home, or the drawer in the bank office filled not with deposit slips, but with sonnets. His father discovered them late that afternoon, page after page of ink-soaked rebellion. Horace Langston summoned him with a voice that carried the force of steel mills. He held the stack of poems like a bundle of unpaid debts. "Choose," he said, his jaw tight as iron. "Ink or inheritance?" It was not a question. It was a verdict. And yet Theodore did not tremble. Something inside him, something fragile yet unbreakable, finally stepped out of the shadows. "Ink," he said. His voice cracked slightly, but determination hardened it. His father stared at him, injured in pride, perhaps even in love, though he would never admit it. He handed Theodore $12, the allowance for a month, and nothing more. That night, Theodore packed a single valise, rolled up a few shirts, placed his worn notebook inside, and took only one book with him, a volume of Keats. He left the Langston estate beneath a sky stitched with winter stars, and he did not look back. The next week, he accepted a job as a schoolteacher in a one-room schoolhouse on the outskirts of rural Ohio. The building was no larger than a barn loft, its windows clouded with frost, its roof creaking each time the wind complained. For $18 a month and a cot in the back room, Theodore taught children whose boots had holes, whose hands were calloused from chores, and whose parents believed Shakespeare was some kind of European cattle disease. Yet Theodore approached his new life with an almost sacred reverence. He carried Keats in his coat pocket. He read poetry aloud beneath lanterns, letting the warm vowels and cool consonants drift into the imaginations of farm children who had never left the county. They recited lines from memory, sometimes shyly, sometimes proudly. They learned that words could be worlds. During summer evenings, they gathered outside, barefoot in damp grass, and together they recited Ode to a Nightingale under a sky swollen with stars. Those moments, Theodore felt, were worth more than any vault his father could have shown him. Among his students was a girl named Clara Whitlow, a sharp-eyed, curious young woman with a mind that flickered like a struck match. She worked on her family's farm before dawn, yet she arrived at school with a hunger for language Theodore had seen in only a few people during his life. She scribbled constantly, lines of poetry, sketches of clouds, questions he seldom had answers for. One winter morning, Clara shyly handed him a folded sheet of paper. It was a poem, raw, fierce, defiant. It spoke of the way snow swallowed sound, of the ache of wanting more from life than survival. Theodore read it once, then again, feeling a pang of awe. Without telling her, he mailed it to the Atlantic Monthly, believing in her talent more firmly than he had ever believed in his own. A month later, when the acceptance letter arrived, Clara fainted from excitement. Her family didn't entirely understand what had happened. How could a girl from nowhere be published in a magazine from Boston? But Clara understood, and Theodore, quietly, gratefully, refused to take any credit. She blossomed quickly, determined to leave rural Ohio and make her mark on the world. By 17, she was writing essays for local newspapers. By 18, she received an offer to apprentice with a journalist in Cleveland. And then, too suddenly, too cruelly, consumption took her. She died at 19, her lungs collapsing like wet paper. Her dreams extinguished before they had properly caught fire. The morning Clara passed, Theodore sat behind his schoolhouse desk long after the children had gone home. He tried to write something, anything, but the words refused to come. The grief pressed down too heavily, an ink-black stone on his chest. By spring, he closed the schoolhouse doors for the last time. He left the key beneath the mat and walked away from the only home he had known in years. His steps were slow but determined. He carried no suitcase, only a coat, his notebook, and his ever-faithful Keats. Thus began the wandering years. Theodore traveled by train across the Midwest, sending postcards to no one in particular. Each carried a line of verse, a snippet of thought, a bit of dust from wherever he happened to be. He drifted to ports, deserts, river towns. He stood on docks watching ships vanish into morning fog. He crossed wheat fields glowing like molten gold and slept beneath mesas that loomed like the bones of ancient gods. Sometimes he taught briefly in small towns, just long enough to earn a ticket to somewhere else. Other times he worked in libraries, rearranging shelves while murmuring lines of poetry under his breath. He lived frugally, but never unhappily. Freedom was cheaper than inheritances, he found, but sorrow followed him, quiet as a shadow. Clara's death haunted him, not because he believed he could have saved her, but because he had been the first person to believe in her, and perhaps the last. His students' voices echoed in his memory, sometimes warming him, sometimes aching like an old wound. Years passed, and Theodore traveled westward until the land changed beneath his feet. The deserts of Nevada gave way to the great fog-draped hills of California. San Francisco in the late 1890s was a city buzzing with invention, ambition, and earthquake tremors no one yet understood. Theodore found work unloading cargo on piers, then cataloging books in a small independent library, then teaching a night class on poetry at a community hall. He was thin, older now, but his eyes still carried the soft, restless shine of someone who loved the world too deeply. The last postcard he ever sent was postmarked from San Francisco. The handwriting was unmistakably his, elegant, melancholic, with a slight slope as though leaning into a wind. It said only, "The fog tastes of endings. I go to meet it." The postcard arrived in the rural Ohio county where he had once taught. No return address, no explanation. Weeks passed, then months. No one heard from him again. Rumors grew quietly, like moss. Some said he had joined a ship's crew and vanished into the Pacific. Others claimed he lived in the redwood forests under a different name. A few whispered he had thrown himself from the cliffs at Land's End, swallowed by the waves. No body was ever found, no belongings recovered. Theodore Langston simply disappeared. But the story did not end. Every year, on the first day of school in that rural Ohio county, teachers found a book on their desks. Always the same edition of Keats, new, pristine, untouched by dust or age. Inside, the pages lay open to the same line. Beauty is truth, truth, beauty. No note, no signature. Just the book. Silent, unmistakable, impossible. Some thought it was a prank. Some thought it was a tradition, passed quietly from one teacher to the next. Others, especially those who had once been students themselves, believed something else entirely. They believed Theodore had never stopped teaching. That somewhere, in ways unseen, he honored the promise he made when he walked away from wealth and ease. He had chosen ink, and in doing so, he had chosen life. Messy, wandering, aching, beautiful life. The legend of Theodore Langston grew over the decades. Students who became teachers passed on stories of the soft-spoken man who loved poetry more than breathing. Farmers who once doubted him remembered how their children came home, speaking lines of Shakespeare and Keats as though born with them. Old men recalled the wanderer who sometimes returned to the county in secret, watching the school from afar before drifting away again like mist. The bank his father had run so meticulously eventually changed hands, then closed, then became a historical society museum. Inside, visitors could see the family portraits, including the one taken the week the argument occurred. People often commented on Theodore's eyes in that portrait. A mixture of sadness and defiance, as though he already knew he'd choose a different life. As though ink already beaten his veins. By the mid-20th century, teachers still found the books. New editions, sometimes newer than the bookstores carried. No fingerprints, no dust, no signs of purchase. Some teachers admitted they kept their copies, treasuring them. Others placed them in school libraries. A few insisted that late at night, when the halls were empty, they heard the faint turning of pages in the old schoolhouse, the same one Theodore had once closed with trembling hands. In time, poets began to visit the county, seeking inspiration from the ghostly legend of the wandering teacher. They sat beside the creek where he once read Keats aloud. They stepped into the restored schoolhouse, now a museum exhibit. They traced their fingers over his handwriting displayed in framed letters and notes. And some of them, unexpectedly moved, whispered thanks into the silence, as though speaking to a presence still listening. Generations came and went. Highways cut through old fields. Towns modernized. But the story of Theodore Langston, banker's son, reluctant heir, wandering poet, endured. His life became a reminder that not all wealth is numbers. Not all legacies are carved in granite or ledger books. Sometimes the richest inheritance is a single line of poetry, passed from hand to hand, echoing through time. And so, every year, on that first day of school, when the sun lifts over the hills and the teachers unlock their classrooms, there comes a moment of quiet expectancy. A pause. A hush. And then, there it is. Another volume of Keats. Another silent tribute. Another whisper from a man who believed in beauty more than certainty, in truth more than inheritance. A man who chose ink. A man who disappeared into fog, yet somehow remained. And somewhere, if one listens carefully, very carefully, the faintest echo of a voice drifts on the morning air, reciting the words he loved most. Beauty is truth. Truth beauty. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. And in that echo, in that quiet, trembling truth, Theodore Langston continues to teach, across years, across miles, across the veil of time itself.